Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of History of Middle-earth. I apologize for what might be a rather chaotic last few moments because, well, I turned on the computer and I got ready to start streaming, and OBS said, "Hey, would you like to install an update?" And I was like, "Sure, OBS. Go ahead and install that update." And it broke everything. So, as a warning to my streamer friends, the latest OBS update is quite possibly going to break your world. Yeah, I should have known that. I should have expected that and just told it no. But I was stubborn and I thought it won't be that bad. It won't be that bad.
Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
Kyle, thank you so much for once again being Spartacus. Much appreciated, my friend. Yes, OBS just absolutely pippined my stream. And I do not appreciate it very much. You wish there was a better warning about that because OBS 28 is a pretty huge update. Yeah, things look very, very different on my dashboard right now. So much so that I'm not 100% sure exactly where everything is.
Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! Spartacus!
Fidelia, thank you so much for your subscription and for being around as always. I hope you are also having a great day, and thank you for once again being Spartacus. What do we think of Rings of Nevermind? You fell victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is never update OBS before a stream, but only slight less known as this. Never get involved in Land of War in Asia. See, the thing is, I have actually been messed over by not updating a stream or OBS before a stream, because then it won't work with Twitch because OBS has changed something and Twitch changed something in response, and then there's the mismatch. So it's also possible that if you don't update, you also get messed over. So it's a giant crapshoot, and it's mostly just crap. But welcome back, everybody. I have taken a brief hiatus to go attend Dragon Con, so we didn't have a stream on Thursday, nor did we have a stream on Tuesday. And I was supposed to try to stream this. Well, I was supposed to stream this. Hey, J-Mar, what's going on? Welcome, welcome. I was supposed to stream the panel that I was in on Saturday. And due to yet another classic blunder, that being it won't be hard to stream remote, I goofed it up. Most notably, I was led to believe that I was going to be able to both use my phone and stream from it at the same time. And I was led to believe this by Twitch app telling me that it was easy to use. That is not the case. It would not let me switch my camera. It would not let me change basically anything while Twitch app was running. I should have listened to Cave Geek. This is my official nod to recognizing that Cave Geek is the better mobile streamer, and I should have listened to him. It was pure hubris and dumb stubbornness that cost me the ability to stream from the panel itself. As a note, it likely would not have been very good anyway because the room itself had a bit of an audio issue and the microphones were not too terribly loud. And even if someone were sitting 2 seats over from me on the dais, it's not guaranteed that you all would have been able to hear what they were saying anyway. I would have needed to probably tap into the actual PA system in the room to get a good live feed. So, yeah, this is probably going to be better overall. as we will be able to have discussion. I will be able to talk to you in a way that you could understand, and everybody will be able to hear and comprehend. So let me catch up and say hello to everybody. Hello, Cave Geek. I would actually love to put your image up as a stream coming soon page. If you have I know you have an image because you use it to make prints. But if you send that to me, I will absolutely use it as my coming soon page. Hello, Tuna. Hello, Lumpy. Good to see you, friends. Kyle, thank you again. Tad, welcome in. Hope you're having a good one. Fidelia, thank you again. JMR, good to see you, my friend. Glad to see you back streaming again. Glad to see you working on some Gundam stuff. That double X is looking quite nice. Vipers, so streaming is like thermonuclear war. The only way to win the game is not to play. Except for I like streaming, so did you get my flustered salutations to Cryomera? Cryomera and I had a great time catching up. I said hello for many people. She is just as great of a person in real life as she is on stream. Just as kind and warm-hearted and funny. So she's not playing a character. Cryo is Cryo, and I was very glad to meet her in person. Congratulations on having a voice. Yes, it has come back. Tuesday was pretty rough. Bum ba-dum. Bum ba-dum bum bum. Boo Cocky, thank you so much for that follow and welcome to the adventure. I added a pause there to not potentially be hit by some sort of weird Twitch TOS thing. So Tuesday my voice was pretty bad, but luckily I was just stuck in a car and didn't have very many people to talk to, so it rested. I did have to go back to work and start teaching yesterday, so that was kind of rough. First class today caught me a little bit, but it's mostly back. It's mostly back. It's even possible that someone might not hear you accurately and think you said something you didn't. Thanks, Cave. Much appreciated. David says, wait, am I supposed to be able to understand? Probably not. I'm probably just spouting gibberish, but hey, David, good to see you. Tropical Geek, we can begin because you are here now. Thank you very much. Welcome in. And Green Herring, how are you? Good afternoon. Post-apocalyptic Shane, except I like thermonuclear war. I didn't say that I liked thermonuclear war. I just said that I like streaming. I didn't say that I liked the thermonuclear war. I don't know if anybody would survive that, just to be honest with you. All right. I also don't know why I have Silmarillion down here, but we'll get rid of that for the moment. So, I was on a panel on Saturday of DragonCon. I was invited to this particular panel by a very generous gentleman named Jim, who is one of the OneRing.net staff members. He found my connection through Cave Geek, who is a mutual friend, and he invited me to be on the panel, so I graciously accepted because it sounded like a blast. It was quite an experience. I feel like I have I don't know, it was great. I really enjoyed it. It was very fun. I learned a lot about the movie, which I'm very excited to share with you all. I also met some great people. Righteous Apostate, good to see you. How are you? Hope you're having a good one. For example, this is a fun story, or a great story. The lady I was sitting next to on the panel, myself and another gentleman that were on the panel with me were all speaking to each other prior to the panel beginning, and it turned out that we didn't know each other. So I said, hey, we should sort of introduce ourselves. And so I said, my name is Shane. I have a Twitch channel. And the lady beside me is like, you do history on Twitch. And I was like, Yes, I do. How do you know? Are you one of my viewers? And she turned out to be a professor that teaches at a specific college in California. And I don't necessarily know if she wants me to sort of give away all of her personal information. So I'll just say she's a teacher that teaches at a university in California, and used clips or has used VODs from Adventures in History in her class. She teaches literature, and when she needs a historical background for a particular piece of literature, she has taken to going through my VODs and seeing if I've said anything about it. So I felt very honored by that. There are few things that could have happened here that would have made me feel better about the fact that my streaming is a thing than another professor at another university finding my material and then going, that's the stuff that I want to share with my students. It was a complete random encounter. It was kismet or fortune or fate or whatever you want to call it. It was delightful. I felt very positively reinforced by that experience. So, thank you all. Hey, Akal, good to see you. So I spoke with her and we exchanged contact information, and it might be that next semester I actually get to maybe Zoom call or WebEx into her class and do some question and answer stuff in her class. She's a very interesting individual. She has written several books. Her doctoral dissertation was on the fantasy genre, specifically focusing on Tolkien and Stephen King, who are both people that I really like writing-wise. So there was just a lot of common ground between the two of us, and it was really kind of a fantastic moment to have that adventure together, be on the panel together. So that was really, really neat. But the particular topic of the day is a movie. And I'll probably kick this down to a new line. And that movie is called The War of the Rohirrim. And this particular movie is one of the new properties that's being exercised with the Tolkien rights. So what's up with The War of the Rohirrim? What is the movie going to talk about? What is the background for all of this stuff? And why is this something that is exciting for us as fans of Tolkien? Well, there were several people on the panel. I'm going to do my best to replicate the experience overall. And this is actually going to be fairly nice because it does fit rather well as a History of Middle-earth story, because this is going to be something that is in the appendices. This is not particularly something that gets a lot of attention when it comes to the broader concept of learning about Tolkien stuff or thinking about Tolkien stuff. I am not going to do voices, no. Were I to do an impression of Mr. Jim, I would just find somebody random and do something incredibly kind for them. That would probably be the best impression of Mr. Jim that I think I could do. That dude's a great guy. So I don't know if I can claim influencer status. I'm a guy that did a thing that got another person to recognize it. And let's just be really clear here. My influence circle is pretty small. We love the... yeah. Okay. Appendices. This story is about to burst. I'm hide under my rock of shame. Yeah, so there are all of these appendices that are at the end of The Lord of the Rings, and it talks about a whole bunch of stuff, and it's a lot of background material, and it's a lot of stuff that even happens in the Fourth Age, which is after the end of The Lord of the Rings, and you get a whole bunch of new ideas and new people and new places. And basically, The War of the Rohirrim, as we understand it, is a movie about a specific series of events that took place about 260 years prior to what we would think of as the Lord of the Rings. So if we're talking about when Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin leave to go on their quest to destroy the One Ring, that happens in the Third Age year of 3019. This particular story is 260 years prior to that. But before we get into the specific story itself, we need to give ourselves a little bit of background, and we need to talk about who these Rohirrim are in the first place. So we are going to start with the first king, who is a guy named Yorl the Young. Now you go, well, that looks like Earl, and you're not too far off. We'll talk about this a little bit later on, but the language that we're mostly approximating here is Anglo-Saxon, and this is already in the Third Age. This is a Third Age situation. This is pronounced Yorl, like with a Y almost. So there's a little bit of the E, like Yorl, but this is a one-syllable word. Yorl. Sam and Rosie got busy in the appendices. They did, and they had several daughters and several sons. Did the professor find it painful that she would be in the middle of articulating a topic and some schmuck would make a pun or whip out a tangent? No, I actually was able to sneak in quite a few rather good laughs into the panel. So I thought that was a nice addition, right? Yorl, pronounced like y'all. Kind of. There's a similar rolling to it. But Yorl the Young is the first king of the Rohirrim. And the story makes sense if we put this in context. So let's go to, not to the introduction screen, to the map. So this is our map of the Third Age. Now, as a brief bit of background, at this particular time, there has been a lot of change in the Middle-earth world. And this is fairly late into the Third Age, and the northern kingdoms up here had completely fallen. So the northern kingdom of men, that is basically up here around Lake Evendim. The kingdom of Arnor had fallen. The kingdom of Gondor had lost its kings, and we are now on into the stewards who would go on to basically take over the rule of Gondor after the last of the kings. And Gondor was in a pretty bad spot, mostly due to these people from down here in the south. And if you know anything about the wars in the south, there are several big bad groups down here, like the Haradrim, who live right down here. There are groups, this region right over here is called Khand, spelled Khand, and they're bad guys. And then a little bit further south than this, I should have picked a better map, we actually have another region called Umbar, where a particular group of sailors very frequently harass the coast of Gondor. So if you know anything about the Lord of the Rings, you'll know that there were black ships that were sailing up the river Anduin. Those ships were the Corsairs of Umbar. Now, in the time of our first king, Yorl, there had been a big assault on Gondor. And there was an attack from various regions. This time Gondor extended up into this region here, where we see Rohan now. But Easterlings and Variags of Khand and Corsairs of Umbar and the Haradrim had all assailed the southern kingdom. And the steward of Gondor, this guy named Curion, sends out word to basically anybody that might be able to help. So all of the kingdoms up here had basically been destroyed, but there were still men all over this place. And up here in the north, there were a group of horsemen, right? And these are going to be the Rohirrim, but at that time they weren't referred to as the Rohirrim. So they heard the call of Gondor and they rode down the river and they broke into this region here with their horses and drove off the invasion. They aided Gondor, and Yorl the Young is going to receive this region right here, which in the previous period of time was called Kalinardon, which is basically Big Green Field. And he cedes this to the men of Rohan, and they make themselves a kingdom. Now, what is important about this story is a few things. Number one, it establishes a treaty between Rohan and Gondor in exchange for ruling this particular region. The kings of Rohan swear what's called the Oath of Yorl to Gondor to come to their aid if need. And Gondor basically gives them this region and says, this is your area, you take care of it, you hold on to it, and you be friends with us. So that is a background. But what is important is that another thing that's important right over here, where you see Westfold. So when this region gets ceded to the Rohirrim, the people in this region, which you can see over here called Dunland, are going to get pushed out of this region, and they're going to be forced to settle on the other side of the mountains. Now, this is going to be problematic because these people, the Dunlanders, are going to hold a very bitter grudge against the Rohirrim for what they claim to be stealing their land. So that's a big deal. You're not supposed to take that from them. And this region right here, which is the fords of Isen. So this particular river is the Isen River. This, of course, is Isengard, where Saruman would live during Lord of the Rings period of time. They pushed the Dunlanders across the fords of Isen, and basically they're going to settle over here and hate the Rohirrim. So all of this is preface to what's happening in the story of the War of the Rohirrim. Yorl, pronounced like Rick Grimes from The Walking Dead, says coral. That's actually fairly close. Raveland, good night to my favorite streamer. Thank you very much. Raveland, good to see you. Hope you're having a good one. Welcome. We're talking History of Middle-earth tonight to catch up on some stuff that I was supposed to have shared on Saturday when I was on a panel at DragonCon, and it just didn't work out because of my own stubbornness and technical malfunctions. So, okay, so that's the background. That's where Yorl the Young comes from. Now, the main character in our movie is this guy named Helm Hammerhand. Now, that's a fairly impressive name just by nature. So what's up with this guy? Who is he and what is he doing? So Helm is the sixth king of the Rohirrim. And if we look at our... I keep clicking intro, I'm sorry. If we look at our images here, we can see that this is our... whatchamacallit, good gracious. This is our family tree. So we have Yorl the Young, Brago's the builder. He's the guy that builds Meduseld. Baldur has... We'll talk... Anyway, basically we come down the line here and we get to Helm Hammerhand. He is the son of Graham, the fifth king. He has two sons, Haleth and Hama, and his sister's name is Hild. He sounds like a dwarf name. Maybe. I could see that. I shall call my firstborn Breaker Flask Glove. Okay, that works. You can do that. So Helm is the sixth king, and there's a little bit of trouble going on in his world. Most notably, he is in conflict with a particular noble named Freka. So, what's up with this? Well, Freka was part Dunlander. So, one of the previous kings, a king named Freowine, supposedly had a a relationship with one Dunlandish princess, and this carried forth a child. And so Freka is going to claim that he is a noble both of the Dunlanders and of Rohan. And Helm is not particularly going to like this guy very much, but as a gesture to basically try to make some peace here, Helm is going to invite this guy to council. So when Helm is taking, stock with his nobles, and when he is asking for advice and things like that, he will graciously invite Freka, even though most of the other Rohirrim nobility and Helm don't really care for this guy. He's just trying to tip a hat in this general direction. Now, this is, of course, going to end up causing trouble, because Freka is going to believe that he is not only just, one of the council, but that because he traces his line back through the same family as Helm himself, that Freka is basically one of the people that should be considered to be king. So he is a potential claimant to the throne. And this is going to be even more troublesome because, of course, Helm is the king in an unbroken direct line. There's no dispute about his family. There's dispute about Freka. So this all is going to come to a big point when Freka demands from Helm that his son Wolf marry Helm's daughter. Now, in the story, in the actual appendix, we don't get Helm's daughter's name. She's just an unnamed daughter. Now, he has 2 sons, and he has a daughter. So again, his sons are Haleth and Hama. But Freka's kind of got an angle here, where if my son Wolf marries your daughter, well, clearly this is the rejoining of the royal lines, and that means my son should be king. Well, your grandpa told me my great-great-great-great-grandmother was a Dunlander princess. Well, there you go, Cave. Just like everybody else's in the South. The daughter's name was Eddie Vedder. Not quite. So, Helm gets a little upset, and Freka causes a fracas. See what I did there? I got you. Don't care of me, don't her. Yeah, I was with you. So, Helm is going to basically say, look, why don't we step outside? And you clearly have some beef with me, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to vent your frustrations, but let's go outside and we'll handle this one-on-one. So they go outside, and Helm basically says, if you want your son to marry me, we should deal with this right now, because I'm not going to have it. And I got you out here so that if you want to try to make it happen, you can try to make it happen. And Freka's going to protest this. And then Helm is basically going to decide, well, I'm going to kill you. And he punches Freka in the head with one big punch. And it knocks Freka senseless. And a couple of days later, he basically dies from the impact of this single blow to the head. This is where Helm is going to get his nickname Hammerhand, because he strikes like a hammer. So Freka dies. Yeah, One Punch Man, Middle Earth style, right? So Helm Hammerhand, right? He's gonna beat the crap out of people, and it's a pretty powerful punch, right? And thus helmets were invented and how they got their name. That would be great if that were the case. That would be great. Are you wearing your helm protection? And they just drop the protection, and then, are you wearing your helm? So things go more or less back to normal. Wolf is going to retreat and go sort of stew among the Dunlandings, and for a few years things are going to be okay. But it turns out that there's going to be some future problems. So about 4 years later, and this is the year 2758 of the Third Age, Wolf is going to make an alliance between himself, Easterlings that are coming from the eastern side of the River Anduin, and Corsairs of Umbar to plan what is basically a three-pronged attack. So if we go back to our map, what we're saying here is there's going to be an attack from Dunland into Rohan. There's going to be an attack from the east across the river into Rohan. And there's going to be an attack up the river by the Corsairs to basically block this little pass right here, just past Minas Tirith, so that Gondor can't send aid to Rohan. So this is going to attack Rohan from east and west and the south to sort of plug up any attempt at getting there from Rohan. Oh dang, Helm is drunk again and looking for a fight. Everybody put your helms on, right? So this particular attack is rather dangerous and threatening, and Helm and his army are caught mostly unawares. The Corsairs from the south are going to block up the river, the Easterlings attack, and in the process, they're only able to muster a small army, and they expect at this point that Wolf is behind it, so they make their way towards the fords of Isen. And again, that is right here. This is the gap of Rohan, by the way. And there's going to be a battle here at the fords of Isen where they run into a much more substantial force of Dunlandings than Helm expected, and they're going to lose this battle. And it's at this point that Helm is going to have to make a fairly decisive decision. He's going to have to figure out what to do. Are we going to retreat back to the capital, or are we going to try to meet them out on the field, or are we going to try to move to some defensible position and make... is that near Isengard? It is. So Isengard is right here. This is the Ring of Isengard. The River Isen flows out of the Misty Mountains into Isengard, and then out this direction, and then out this way. So the fords of Isen here, Isengard located right here. And you can see Edoras, which is the capital of Rohan here, and you can see here in these mountains Helm's Deep. Now, at that time, this was not called Helm's Deep. It was just called the Hornburg, or the Sudburg, which is the southern defensive structure, right? So they're actually going to retreat to Helm's Deep. Now, one of Helm's sons, Hama, had been left at Edoras with a force to basically try to hold on to the capital. And they're going to get overrun by Easterlings and Corsairs, and Hama is going to get killed basically defending the halls on the steps of the hall itself. So he's basically standing in the doorway of Meduseld, the big mead hall of the kings, and gets killed there in the doors. And Wolf is going to set himself on the throne of Rohan and claim the kingship. Now, Helm's not dead, right? Helm is still in the Hornburg. So it's interesting here that I can show you this. This actually comes from the movie Two Towers, where you see the group moving into Helm's Deep, and this statue here of Helm with the hammer and the horn. So this is supposed to be Helm Hammerhand. The movies depict the capital of Rohan as being quite small. Was it bigger then? No, and the movies don't necessarily do the best justice to Edoras either. In the book, we don't get a terribly large amount of description of Edoras, but it's fair to say that it would have been larger than what was expected in the movie. So if we can justify this by doing a little bit of math that's based on the amount of troops that get mustered from Edoras itself. So when Gandalf and Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas arrive at Edoras to talk to Theoden, and they drive out, Wormtongue and the Spirit of Sauron, and they call up an army to go to Helm's Deep, and they get a couple of thousand soldiers just from Edoras. And that would represent, if, let's just hypothetically speaking, if they're going to take 2,000 soldiers just from Edoras, if we hold up population percentages and we say that men are going to be about half the population, and not every man went, because some of the population was already out with Erkenbrand patrolling in the Eastfold. That's going to say maybe we got 40% of the men in Rohan. We're going to have to take another 5 or 10% off for people that just couldn't fight. So if 2,000 is maybe 30% of the overall male population that could fight, maybe the entire population is somewhere closer to 10,000. And there's no way that the way that Edoras was depicted in the Lord of the Rings movies would have held 10,000 people. So it sort of gets short-shifted a bit in the movies. It probably was larger than they showed it. And I think that we can probably get a fair amount of extrapolation if we just look at things like troop movements and basic arithmetic of who could count as a troop. But if you get what I'm saying, feel free to pick around on that if you have anything additional. Would you say that Helm was deep in there? I'm not sure exactly what that is. Helm, Hammer, and Hammerhand. It looks like a sad village in the movie. It was based on a painting by Alan Lee. And there are going to be a lot of these paintings that exist. Alan Lee has done some. Of course, John Howe has done some. There was a lot of work produced prior to the movies, but as I always say when we are doing history of Middle-earth stuff is, if you see something that doesn't look right to you, you watch the movies, you've read the books, and you go, I don't know if that looks right. It's okay to say, in my mind, that person looks a little bit different, or this city looks a little bit different, because let's remember, the movies are an interpretation of the books, and I love the movies. I've watched the movies a lot, and I've watched the extended versions a lot. We used to have a thing at my house where we would invite everybody over, and we would watch all of the extended versions in a day, and we called it Loaderfest, and it was amazing. It hasn't happened for a while thanks to COVID, but you get what I'm saying. Like, I love the movies, but let's also remember that the movies are adaptations of the book. So just because it's in the movie doesn't mean it's absolutely the way that it was in the book. And of course, if you've read the book and it developed a sort of mental image to you that's different than what was seen in the movies, it's okay to go, well, I like Peter Jackson's image of this, but this is more my image of this. And as long as you do your thing and you're enjoying it, it's fine. Let's remember, at the end of the day, it's all just books, right? And Tolkien would not have wanted us to argue about what it looked like. He would have just wanted us to have fun with it. Or at least I hope so, right? JW, I think I know who you are, JW Wirt. And if you are who I think you are, welcome. I hope that you are having a good one. And Cave just said so. There we go. And here we have a picture from Alan Lee. Yeah, so Edoras. There we go. The geography is correct, but again, we don't get an overwhelmingly large amount of description of the location itself. We just know that it's on the top of a hill. There's a ring around it. There are homes above and below it, and of course, the ring of the wall is broached by a road. That road has mounds on the side of it. There's 7 on the left side, 9 on the right side. So these are things that we know. Everything else is kind of open to you kind of feeling however you feel or think. You've been to Mount Sunday in New Zealand, no way 10,000 people on top of it, at least as far as the movie location, so it makes sense why the film would have needed to make it look smaller. Yeah, so specifically for the movie, and you're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things that they were looking for was something that closely fit the description, and what they needed was sort of an isolated hill that was closer to some larger mountains, and they found that particular location of Mount Sunday, and they were like, well, this is pretty clearly where we need to put Edoras, and then they just took some license and made it a little bit, adapted. And that's okay, because again, it looks nice, and I love the way that they showed it, and when they pan in and have that helicopter shot in the movie where they first show Edoras, I was like, that's Edoras, and I knew it immediately. So, it's okay. Have I watched the new Amazon show? Is it any good? For the purpose of this stream, let us say that I have watched them. I do have an opinion, but since we're supposed to be talking about the War of the Rohirrim, let's try to stay on that before I trace all of those rabbits. Was Helm a landowner, possibly with livestock? Could there have been of Helm's sheep? Helm's sheep. That's great. There were probably livestock. They probably didn't make everything out of horsehair. So there very well could have been Helm's sheep. We don't know if he had big herds of stuff, but that would have been pretty great. That's only on Sundays. During the week, when it's Mount Monday, it's much larger. With Mount Wednesday, Edoras' hump is the largest. There we go. It is the hump day. All right, so Helm and the remains of his army after this defeat at the fords of Eisen are going to fall back to the Sudburg or the Hornburg. And I've got an image here, and again, this is from the movie, but I think that this is actually a fairly good representation of what the castle would have looked like. So a few things here. It's in this gorge that is cut into the mountains. We know that it has a big wall that extends across the front, and there's a very large ramp that leads up to a big gate, which is, of course, surrounded by another big wall. So this is a pretty good interpretation of this, and I don't really have many, if any, things to pick about that at all. I do particularly think that it's funny that they named this horse Brago in the movie, given the fact that Brago was actually one of the kings of Rohan, being the second king, the guy that built the Hall of Meduseld, and I always thought it funny that he gets a nod as a horse. But the horse does go on to protect Rohan, so I guess, we'll call it fair. So they move back, and they hole up in the Hornburg. Now, here's where things get even more unfortunate. It turns out that all of this was happening fairly late in the year, and as soon as they are able to secure themselves in the fastness of the Hornburg, winter sets in really early, and this is all the way up into August of the year. And when it sets in really hard. This is referred to in Lord of the Rings lore as the Long Winter, which is a really long one. It goes all the way from August of one year to March of the next year, which is, that's way longer than any winter has any right to be. So the army is stuck inside the Hornburg, and there are a couple of attempts at breaking loose, and Helm's son Haleth even volunteers to lead a force in an attempt to break loose and contact anybody that might be able to come for aid. And unfortunately, they send Haleth and some riders out, and he is captured and killed. So at this point, Helm has lost both of his sons. He lost Hama at the doors of Meduseld defending the capital, and he loses Haleth in this attempt at gaining them some aid. Now, this, of course, is going to make Helm very upset, and he being a king, captured and killed by the enemy army, who have basically laid siege to the Hornburg so that they can't get reinforcements and can't get out. So this was sort of a daring raid in an attempt to break through, force a passage through the siege lines. and they get caught by the enemy army and killed. It's not so great for them. So now, what is Rohan to do? Well, Helm is going to literally take things into his own hands. He decides that in his grief, he's going to exact whatever cost or toll that he can from the opposing army, and he is going to begin making nighttime raids. So he will wait until it gets dark, and he will blow his horn, which of course echoes off of the walls of the cavern, and then he will stalk out into the night by himself, unarmed, and he begins to kill Dunlendings with his bare hands and leave their bodies as warning signs of what happens to people who mess with Rohan. And this goes on for so long that it begins to be psychological damage to the Dunlandings, or Dunlanders, who are trying to, yes, the Dunlandings. You enjoy the Rings of Power. It's a fun rewrite. A few timeline changes must have been made. Crazy though. We'll talk about that at another point. I promise I'll give you everything that you wanted to know about Rings of Power. I will probably wait until the entire series has come out so that we don't have to do continual updates along the way, because that will just take up a ton of time. Telling the story later. I don't mean to blow my own horn, but first I blew my own horn. Yeah, exactly. So this horn blast in the night becomes a psychological thing, where the horn blows and then the Dunlandings just get freaked out and panic, right? So there are also these sort of weird, kind of quasi-supernatural things that start getting attached to this story, where even the people of Rohan, the soldiers that are inside, start sort of thinking that maybe Helm is actually invincible, and that if he goes out without a weapon, that he can't be killed. And because he's doing this basically on a nightly basis, the rumor starts to grow that he's going to basically be able to, like, save them, maybe single-handedly, but anyway, or double-handedly, depending on how he decides to beat them up. You can take that pun if you want to. But on the Dunlending side, it starts becoming a little bit more grim, and it starts thinking that maybe the reason that he's going out to kill all these Dunlandings is so that he can drag their body back into the Hornburg, so that his men who are, sieged in there can eat them. So this starts the rumor that the men of Rohan eat their captives. Now, if you remember, or if you've read the Lord of the Rings novels, at the end of the Battle of Helm's Deep, the orcs all run into the woods, or the Huorns, and they all get swallowed up. But the men of Dunland continue to fight because they're scared to surrender, because they had been told that the men of Rohan killed and tortured and ate their captives. And that rumor that is still persisting several hundred years later ties back into this particular story, where Helm is going out every night and strangling these people to death, or killing them and their bodies being covered by the snow, and they can't be found. So there's a connection here between this sort of weird, stark, lone, gaunt, grim figure and things like ghost stories, but we're getting there. Anyway, it's planned for 50 episodes. We want it all, and we want it now. I know you do. We'll see if it gets to 50 episodes. We'll just say that. I'm more interested in this, the real Lord of the Rings lore. Well, I mean, I've watched the show. I have opinions. But anyway, so this continues for weeks and weeks and weeks and months and months and months. And the situation within the Hornburg gets worse and worse and worse. And one night, Helm goes out, and he doesn't come back in the next morning. So the the men of Rohan kind of send out a little search party to look for him, and they find him frozen, standing, basically on his prowl. And I've always thought that it was really neat that he was still standing up. That he had died and had frozen to death, but even in death, he was still standing to protect his homeland. That was always such a really nice touch to the story for me. So here I can actually share an image. This was something that was shared on our panel. This is a piece of concept art that comes from Warner Brothers. So I'll make sure that I try to get that to show up. So here, sorry. So here's Helm, and he is standing here on a big pile of bodies, frozen. Frozen, stiff, and dead in front of the walls of the Hornburg. And that's a pretty wicked image. I think it's pretty grim. Now, the siege is not lifted at this point. The siege is still going on. And because of the sort of like psychic damage, right, that had gone on inside of the Dunlanding camp, they sort of think that Helm is not really gone. He might be dead, but now he's some sort of phantom or something, and he is like, his spirit is still stalking the valley, and they still sometimes at night claim to hear the horn blowing in the valley. And then everybody gets freaked out again because the ghost of Helm is now going to stalk the land and continue to kill the bad guys. And this is a really kind of weird little story. And let's remember that there are plenty of ghosts in Lord of the Rings. Now, do we know that Tolkien was specifically saying that this guy turned into something like a wight, perhaps, like the Barrow Wights that are up closer to Hobbiton? Or is this perhaps something more akin to the army of the dead that are down the paths of the dead that Aragorn summons? Or is this really not a thing at all? And because ghosts do exist, the Dunlandings are just kind of creating this in their mind. We really don't know. The story doesn't give us too terribly much more to go on than what happened here, but it is pretty neat. Now, there are still things to hope for, and the hope of Rohan comes in the form of a guy named Freelof, and he is Helm's nephew. So Helm had a sister named Hild, and Freelof's name, frequently you'll see him called Freelof Hildson, or Hildson, right? So son of Hild. And this is where the second line of kings from Rohan are going to take over. So if we go back to our image here, we can see Helm and Haleth and Hama, both of whom have passed away at this point. But Graham had Hild as a daughter, and here we have Freelof. So this is going to start what is the second line of Rohan kingship, coming from Freelof here. And he had taken shelter up in Dunharrow. So if you know about the paths of the dead, and you know about the winding path that goes up the face of the rock with the weird statues of the Pukul men that are described in the book, that sort of fastness is called Dunharrow. At the top, there's a region that's called the Furian Field, where basically you can keep a store of arms and goods and men. This is sort of where there's that scene in the movie where Eowyn begs Aragorn to go with him, and he refuses to allow her to go down the paths of the dead with him. This is also where Merry finds out that he's not supposed to come, and he then follows anyway to Edoras, where he gets told that you definitely can't come, and then he goes, of course, with Eowyn to fight. She's under the guise at that point of Durnhelm. But anyway, so this is the fastness of Dunharrow, and Freelof has men there, and has basically waited out the long winter. And he's going to make sort of a daring raid, and he's going to try to take back Edoras. So he's going to come down out of the mountains and strike at Edoras. Wolf, thinking that all of the enemies had been conquered at this point, or at least hemmed in, is going to get caught completely unawares, and Freelaf is going to be able to not only take back Edoras, but begin to turn the tide. This is also around the same time that Gondor is able to muster some support and break back through down here in the south to send aid up into the southern part of Rohan. And over the course of the next year or so, Freelaf, as king of Rohan, and the aid of Gondor, are going to push out the Dunlendings, the Easterlings, and the Corsairs. So this is going to sort of reestablish the peace of Rohan, but there's a neat little tag end where Freylaf and the steward of Gondor are going to meet, and Gondor is going to recognize Freylaf as the rightful king. Freylaf is going to re-swear the Oath of Yorl, and at this point, one of the Astari shows up. So these are the wizards, and this particular wizard is Saruman. And he goes, "Hey everybody, you might know who I am. I'm a wizard, I'm really smart, I'm really powerful, and I've noticed that you've had some trouble keeping your borders safe. So there's a really cool tower that you should probably let me take over." Now, it should be noted that in the particular war that we're talking about, the armies of the Dunlendings and the Easterlings had shown up at the Ring of Isengard, or the Wizard's Vale, which at that point is not probably the right thing to call it because there wasn't a wizard in it. But in the books, it's referred to as Nan Kuranir. But Isengard, the Ring of Isengard, had been inhabited, but they had not been able to get into the Tower of Orthanc itself. Now, Saruman, being a cunning guy, had sort of figured out that there was probably cool stuff in there left over from the glory days of Gondor, and he goes, "Look, you need friends, I'll be your friend. If you give me the keys to Orthanc, I'll go in, I'll make sure that it's safe, and we'll be buddies." And this is when Saruman takes up residency in the Tower of Orthanc, and it's probably not too long after that that he starts discovering all of the cool stuff, including the Palantir, that nice big glowing orb thing that, Pippins that are fools of a took can't help but look at. And this is going to begin in motion many of the events that happened during the big War of the Ring about 260 years later. So, that is the historical background from within Middle-earth. Now, it's a pretty interesting story. I really like the way that is portrayed in the particular appendices. I always read the appendices. They're one of my things. But, as we all know, there are going to be interpretations of this, right? So how are the people making the movie going to interpret some of this stuff? Well, first off, it is going to be an anime movie, right? So it is not going to be what you might consider something that looks a lot like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. But from everything that I heard in the panel, the people that are doing the animation, and especially the director, have worked with groups of people like Weta, the effects group. So the director is a guy named Kenji Kamiyama. And if you are familiar with the world of anime, he's most likely going to be noticed by his work on Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. Which is a pretty great show. I don't know if you all watch anime, but if you haven't seen Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, if you like the original Ghost in the Shell movie, you'll like that show as well. So Kenji Kamiyama is the director. So who built Orthanc? That's a great question. Originally, way back in the day, It is suspected that the Numenorians built Orthanc. It carved out of the living rock itself. That's the suspicion. We don't necessarily ever get. Well, let me back up. I don't think we get a specific name of a person that built it. I don't think the original builder is named. But it was built back in the Second Age when the Numenorians first made their trips back to Middle-earth and began to conquer it during the sort of golden age of Numenor, when they were sort of returning to Middle-earth as conquerors. From the people who made Blade Runner Black Lotus, right? So the animation team that is doing the actual animation is called Sola Entertainment, and they did do work on Blade Runner stuff, but they're the ones that did Blackout 2022. So if you've seen any of the prequel material that comes before Blade Runner 2049, you'll know that one of the first of those is an anime short called Blade Runner Blackout 2022, which is quite good. And if you like Blade Runner and if you like 2049, you should watch the little prequel stuff. I think there are 3 episodes, and that one gives a pretty nice piece of lore that I won't spoil for you, but it explains why certain things in 2049 happen the way that they do. So we know that... so Kenji Kamiyama, again, he's the director. He did Ghost in the Shell, standalone complex stuff. He also did a series called Eden of the East, which is quite good. The script was written by some of the people that worked on the Dark Crystal, a guy named Jason DeMarco. Jeffrey Addis and Will Matthews are the initial writing, and so there's people that have done lots of good stuff on this, right? It is going to be anime, though. It's going to be 2D anime, not 3D anime, so there's not really going to be a lot of what we might consider like motion capture stuff. If you know anything about like Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, it's very, very 3D. It's sort of well, it came out a while ago, but it was, trying to push like the realistic element of anime. This is going to be more of a 2D thing, and it's for production scenes. It seems like they're going to do pretty well on it. Now, I do have, and I'm glad that Mr. Jim is here so that I can apologize posthumously for stealing his images. By the way, Mr. Jim is the gentleman that invited me to be on the panel and did an amazing amount of really great prep work, and I'm shamelessly stealing this particular image from him. So this is a rundown of everybody that we know is in the cast. So as voice of Helm Hammerhand, we have Brian Cox, who should be well known from anybody. What's interesting here is that we have Miranda Otto, who played Yoan in the original series, coming back as the narrator. And there was a really interesting conversation in the panel about exactly what period of Eowyn's life is going to be depicted while she's telling the story. So at what point in her life is she telling the story, and to whom is she telling the story? So there were several different potential options suggested. One of them was that she was telling this to her child. So if you've read the stories or read the books, you'll know that she actually goes on to marry Faramir, the Prince of Ithilien, and she moves down to live in Ithilien with him. So perhaps she's telling the story to her child, who has maybe not ever seen the home country, because their kid would be part Rohan lineage, but maybe had not spent a lot of time in Rohan. Maybe this is Yoan, kind of like teaching her kids their lineage or history. One thing that wasn't mentioned that I sort of, I have speculated this myself, and I didn't bring it up because I felt like I was already talking too much in the panel as it was. I've got an interesting theory that it might be Yoan telling this story as a way to cheer up the population of Edoras that had moved up to Dunharrow during the War of the Ring. So if you read Lord of the Rings, you'll know that Éomer and Theoden go off to fight at Helm's Deep, and Theoden asks the people of Edoras who should lead you in this dark time, and they go, leave somebody that's from your house to lead us. And he goes, I can't spare Éomer because my son is dead. So this would be Theodred, who had died at the Fords of Isen just previously. And they say, what about Eowyn? She is stern of heart. She is a shield maiden. She can lead us. And he goes, okay, cool. You lead them. So maybe, and this is just, again, complete speculation on my part, maybe as they are waiting to hear about the tidings from the Battle of Helm's Deep, maybe Yoan is telling this story to the Rohirrim who are up in Dunharrow, and sort of make a parallel between this and the story of Freelaf, who was waiting in Dunharrow to reclaim Edoras after the big battle of the original Helm's Deep. So that's sort of my theory, but it's, we don't really know when this is going to be or what this is going to be, but I think that is going to be an interesting situation here. Now, this particular character here is interesting. So Hera is going to be Helm's daughter. And in the story that's in the appendices, we don't get her name. But for the movie, they have apparently given her a name and, according to what we learned in the panel, a much more prominent role in the story. So this is also potentially a connection back with Yoan. So maybe this is her narrating a story of another great shield maiden, because Hera is supposed to be actively involved in the defense of the realm. So this character is one that is going to be introduced in the story in a much larger role than it is in the particular, in the appendices story. But it's a good add, I feel. I feel like that brings an interesting dynamic to the story overall. So we've, of course, got Wolf, who is the sort of the usurper king. We have Freka. And again, all of this is going to be voice acting. So the people that you see here have already done all of their voice recording as far as we are aware, and they are currently doing the actual animation itself. The movie, by the way, doesn't come out until 2024. It is going to take quite a while for them to do all of the voice work. So really interesting stuff here. We also don't know about this particular character. So this guy down here, who's Lord Fright, with the G, you kind of have to make a sound, so it's like Fright. We don't know who this is. I have no idea who this person is in the story, but this would be another addition, perhaps another noble in the court of Edoras. We're not really sure. Now, this is a story all about how Helm's life got turned upside down. That's pretty great. So let me take a minute, just sit on your, well, I'm not going to say that, to tell you how they became a prince of a town called Edoras, but you can figure out what the rhyme was. I won't say it. Anyway, so that's a little bit about the movie itself. It is going to be animated. Kenji Kamiyama is doing the directing. I've seen a lot of the stuff that he's directed before, and I know that you all know that I like anime, but honestly, like, Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex is one of my favorite anime series ever. It was really well done. The treatment of the characters is great. You can tell that he knew what he was doing. And that the reason that one is particularly important to me is because he was adapting something that had already existed. So Ghost in the Shell at that point had already had 2 movies, and he was taking that movie and turning it into a TV show. So because he was able to bridge the adaptation gap between existing product and making something new that was in the spirit of the original, that gives me a lot of hope. And I felt really good when I heard that he was going to be doing the directing. So he gets my tentative thumbs up of approval with the work that he's done so far. I hope that he does just as good of a job, if not a better job, with the Rohan stuff. Yeah, Standalone Complex is pretty good. I really like it, especially the second season. Oh wait, is it the first season? I'm gonna have to go back and watch that again. I can't remember which one where the main antagonist was the Laughing Man, but that one was like. But there were episodes in the other season with. Anyway, we don't have to talk about that. Diverting. Anyway, so. When I was asked to be on the panel, I was asked to bring some historical context so we can shift a little bit to what we might be more comfortable expecting here on my channel. And we could talk a little bit about history and why this history is important and how it relates to who the Rohirrim are. So, most notably, the Anglo-Saxon connection is an important one, right? So Tolkien himself was a professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford. This, of course, is a pretty ancient language that is going to go back to the Anglo-Saxon period. These are both Germanic groups of people that made their way into England beginning in the 400s. The term Anglo-Saxon is a little bit of a later addition when people started trying to refer to those German invaders, and they just sort of lumped them all together and just called them Anglo-Saxons. But prior to that, they were Angles and Saxons and Frisians. And if you've been around the stream, especially in some of the earlier viewer request streams that we've done, we've talked about the Angles and the Saxons quite a bit. The Origins of the Germanic People episode is particularly good. Also, the Barbarian Invasion episodes are quite good for reference of this stuff in particular. But the Anglo-Saxons are going to be really important because this is something that Tolkien knew directly. And a lot of the names for these people that we have inside of the Lord of the Rings story are going to be directly copied from the Anglo-Saxon language, right? So, like our king, Theoden, right? His name literally just means leader. So if you took Theoden and put it in Anglo-Saxon, it's just leader. Yomer, our new king after Theoden dies, his name means famous war horseman. So like this guy's, I've become famous because I'm good at fighting on horseback in war. Yowen means lover of horses. So like these names that we get are going to be basic direct copies of existing Anglo-Saxon words, right? England was a dog pile of invaders, hence the dog pile of language. That is correct, Tuna. That is a fair assessment. I've always joked that English isn't actually one language. It's 4 languages in a trench coat trying to convince somebody it's old enough to buy alcohol. And that's my description of English. So take that for what you will. So Anglo-Saxon, it's a pretty important language. This is, of course, going to be something that Tolkien was familiar with, and something that I didn't elaborate a lot on in the panel because I was trying not to be too long-winded, but having my own channel, I can be as long-winded as I want to, is that if we remember the original purpose of Lord of the Rings and the larger Middle-earth mythology, Tolkien was trying to invent mythology for England itself. And if you look at some of the earliest sketches of what he thought the mechanism of the story would be, it actually turned out that there was this, so and you have to read the deep histories of this stuff. This is like in the History of Middle-earth series, stuff that's in like the Unfinished Tales, or the Book of Lost Tales. There's this character that he made that's called Eowfline. And this was a character, one of the first characters that he created, and this guy was an Anglo-Saxon, and he had basically come to Middle-earth. He had come to England, and he's sort of poking around England, and he starts running into all of these stories, and he finds some of like the original stories of what happened inside England, and the stories that he gets told as the myths are the Lord of the Rings stories and the stories of the First Age and the Second Age and the Third Age. So even if we go back to Tolkien's original conceit for the entire concept of Middle Earth, it still goes back to these Anglo-Saxons that had moved into the area and that find these connections to cultures that had been long lost in history. This, by the way, Ilfwine just means friend of the elves. And if you continue to read the appendices, you'll even know that eventually, when Yomer gets married, he marries the princess of Dol Amroth. They named their son Elfwine, and this was sort of a full circle loop back to, the Rohirrim having this connection with the Anglo-Saxons. That's kind of hard to elaborate on in a panel. You're changing your name to Wine, so you're your friend. Okay, dokie, I'll take it. But there are other direct relationships between Anglo-Saxons and Rohirrim, not just the language stuff. Stuff like this thing. Friend of the wine. Oh, I get you. So you're trying to say, well, then you'd have to find the Anglo-Saxon word for wine, right? I actually don't know what the Anglo-Saxon word for wine is. Probably be something closer to whatever the modern German word for wine is. I don't know what the modern German word is either. Some languages borrow from other languages. English doesn't borrow from other languages. English follows other languages down dark alleys, beats them up, goes through their pockets for loose change, right? and then pronounces those words wrong. Anyway, so this is a location, a particular spot called Taplel Mound. This is an Anglo-Saxon mound. So why do we point out Anglo-Saxon mounds? Well, if we remember our stories about the Rohirrim, we know that as you approach their city of Edoras, the street is lined with burial mounds. We got lots of stuff here. Let's see what we got. Philippa Boyens of Lord of the Rings writing fame is producing the movie. Here's what she says in particular about the Hera character with explicit connection to Anglo-Saxon, specifically Mercia and history. Where we turn to very deliberately is Aethelflaed, the Lady of the Mercians, Alfred the Great's granddaughter. She never ruled as a queen per se. She's known as the Lady of the Mercians. But when she seems to step in when her people needed her, Aethelflaed was also really ingenious, which comes into play with the script. It was an idea that Kamiyama had and that he and the writers played with. I can't tell you too much about it, but it's about how you save your life when you have very little to work with. Hera is very much drawing from sources that fit within the storytelling that Tolkien himself is drawing on. That's excellent, Jim. Thank you very much for that addition. So if we're specifically here talking about Alfred the Great, this brings in a whole other sort of angle. Alfred the Great was a great king of the Anglo-Saxons and is basically the first real king of England, if you really want to look at it that way. Now, this guy's going to have a tough time, and he fights with the Vikings a lot, and he gets beaten up by the Vikings a lot. But basically, he's going to be sort of the first king of a sort of united Anglo-Saxon England, which is pretty impressive if you know how tough that was at the time. England was a giant mess with lots of different kingdoms. Mercia was the biggest one. It's sort of southwestern and south central, roughly speaking, on the big island of Great Britain. It's a pretty interesting period of time, and it's nice that they look back to stuff that is a direct connection. I appreciate that. So we've got some mounds. I shared this particular image, which is referred to as the Uffington White Horse. So this is a pretty interesting location. So this is not actually purely Anglo-Saxon itself, but it does look like it was maintained during the Anglo-Saxon period. The way that this was created was by digging down into the top of this big hill. This is about a meter or two deep, where you hit natural chalk and then you bring in more chalk and you sort of dump it in, and then you have to go back every now and then and clean it out. Now, this is an interesting thing for a few reasons. This is not too far from Oxford. It's only about a 45-minute drive away. This is something that we know pretty clearly that Tolkien would have been aware of. And if we know anything about the Rohirrim themselves, we know that their standards, their battle flags, if you will, are green horses. I'm sorry, green with white horses on them. Something else that I didn't bring up on the panel because I didn't want to ramble too much. But if you know anything about Terry Pratchett's Discworld, specifically the stories that have Tiffany Aching in them, you'll know that she lives in a region called the Chalk, and that one of the things in the Chalk is this big horse of the Chalk. So this is the same thing that Pratchett was referring to aware as well. And the horse is for ceremonial purposes. Well, I mean, it was probably something to do with a religious connection there. If we look at connections between Germanic gods and Slavic gods, which would have probably come into contact together, we know that the Slavic gods had a god of horses, and if you know anything about Legend of Zelda, the god of horses was called Epona. So it's not too much to make a guess that horses were pretty important to these people religiously. Whether or not this was a ceremonial site, it could have also just been cool, right? So it's worth noting. Now, I shared this photo here, which is of a longhouse or a mead house, and I made the point that while a lot of the Rohirrim stuff can be pretty clearly traced back to Anglo-Saxon, it's not just Anglo-Saxon stuff, because the Anglo-Saxons didn't do everything the Rohirrim did, and it's also fair to note that Tolkien himself doesn't directly like copying, like copy-pasting stuff from real-world history into his world. He liked to sort of borrow freely from ideas and make new things, so I sort of presented the idea that the Rohirrim are an amalgamation of both Anglo-Saxon and Norman tradition. Normans, of course, are basically just Vikings that settled in the northern part of France. So this is a longhouse or a mead house, and if we look at the big mead house that is in Edoras, it's referred to as Meduseld. And if we translate that into English from its original language, it just means mead hall. So if you know anything specifically about the stories that come from the Viking histories, like the story of Beowulf or various other stories that are in the Kalevala, you'll know that one prominent figure in a lot of Norse mythology is the mead hall, where you go to get drunk after the day. Of course, even if you know anything about their sort of afterlife in Valhalla, you go out during the day and you kill each other, and at the end of the day you all get resurrected and you go into the big mead hall in the sky, and you get plastered drunk and have a party and conduct yourself with frivolity. You'll get my meaning there. And then you wake up the next day to do it all over again, and that's their version of heaven. So this is something that has some connection to Anglo-Saxon history, but is much more prevalent in the sort of Norse or Norman traditions. And it's a nice blending of the two. It was just some guy trying to impress a girl. Yeah. She just really liked horses, and he went outside of her window and looked out and saw the hill and was like, I'm going to put a horse on that hill for my lady. And it was true love. Actually, she just sent him a scroll that said, can we just be friends? It's unfortunate, you know. You read that they really didn't know how it was constructed until they renovated the horse after covering it with World War II, so the Luftwaffe didn't bomb it. Yeah, so one of the things that happened a lot during World War II is that a lot of really clear landmarks in England got obfuscated or put under tarps or hidden, so that the Luftwaffe, who were flying over trying to, locate where they were, this is, of course, prior to radar, They were trying to orient themselves by natural landmarks. They didn't want a giant gleaming white horse on the side of a hill to go, oh, look, it's the horse. I just need to take a left at the horse and then bomb the next city and I'll be wherever I am, right? So they filled up the horse and put a bunch of stuff over the top of it to keep it from shining out in the darkness. And then after that, they basically redug a lot of it and did a whole bunch of stuff with archaeological excavation stuff around the edges. They also did some carbon dating a little bit later on, and came to understand the Uffington horse quite a bit more. It's pretty interesting. I'd love to go see it. But this is an interesting image here. Of course, this is the very famous Bayeux Tapestry. And the Bayeux Tapestry shows the story of the Norman conquest of England. So this happens in 1066, and it particularly focuses on the big battle of Hastings, where William the Conqueror is going to fight Harold, he was the king of England at that time, but William didn't think that he was the king of England. William thought that William was the rightful king of England. So they're going to have a big fight. And the reason I bring up the Bayeux Tapestry is that we actually do have some letters where people had asked Tolkien himself, are the Rohirrim basically the people that we see on the Bayeux Tapestry? And his response was pretty basically like, kinda, it's close enough, right? So not exactly, but, this gives us a pretty good idea. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at men on horseback. We're looking at them having that really nice sort of simple helm with the neck guard and the nose piece that is basically to keep you from getting your face chopped in. We've got long spears on horseback, and we've got swords on horseback. Also notable here, they are wearing the mail hauberk. So a hauberk is a particular type of mail that covers you basically from below the knee up to about 3/4 of your arm. And I forgot to make a very important reference because I forgot to talk about the hauberk on the panel. If you have seen the movies, when Theoden is arming Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli, Gimli puts on a man-sized hauberk. And when he drops it down, of course, it piles up at his feet because this was designed to be 3/4 length down a man's leg. And what he complains about is, it's a bit tight across the chest. And I should have referred to that in the panel, and I forgot to. You can't remember everything, right? Interesting theory, even more interesting if applied to the Cherney Abbas giant. Yeah, that is actually something really interesting that shows up in the comic book Sandman, and I really love what they did with that. If you've read Sandman, the giant is actually a portal to Fairy, and the Lords of Fairy come through to see a play by William Shakespeare. Where is the helm and the hauberk? Exactly. So this is another piece of reference here. This is a location that is Cheddar Gorge. So it's a location within England where you have this really great big dip in the landscape and these big walls. We know for a fact that this is something that impressed Tolkien because he not only went there on his honeymoon, he also returned later on in life. So this is pretty clearly something that was in his brain, and while we don't necessarily know directly this is what Helm's Deep was based on, it's a pretty good guess, because under those hills are these caves. So now we get the rest of the story and why Cheddar is almost certainly going to be Helm's Deep, because there are these really beautiful caves with water and different colors and all sorts of stalactites and stalagmites and gems and stuff up under the hills. So these are analogous to, of course, the great caverns that happen or that get referred to after the battle goes the wrong way at Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings, and Gamling and Éomer and Gimli and many of the Rohirrim get pushed back into the caves This is where they go to fight, and of course Gimli then describes this to Legolas, and they make the bargain and all of that fun stuff. So that's pretty clearly the reference there. So that's a little bit of the history about where the Rohirrim come from. That is the story from The Lord of the Rings, and that is a bunch of stuff about the movie itself. But do any of you all have any questions about this material, the movie itself, the particular... Oh, I forgot to show a couple of pictures. There are a couple of other pieces of concept art here. Here is one where we have an army approaching what is pretty clearly Edoras. And what's interesting about this is this big guy right over here in the corner. This, of course, is a Mumak, one of the Mumakil. These are Southron war elephants. And if we look at this next picture, this even looks like there are Mumak attacking Edoras itself, maybe even breaching the outer walls. So this, again, is just concept art for the movie, but if they have concept art on it, well, you know, maybe they're going to show up in the movie. And I think it's a pretty fair bet. So it is an elephant, right? Big as a house and gray as a mouse, or Sam would say, right? Did Tom Bombadil ever intervene during this period? No, not really, Indiana Jones. And also, welcome to the chat. Hope you're having a good one. We do lots of adventure here, and if you hit the follow button, you'll even hear an Indiana Jones theme. But Bombadil doesn't really get involved much at all. He would still be hanging out in his little territory that he has designed for himself. Bombadil is not really... Man, he's such an enigma, right? But it's pretty clear that he was not really involved in the larger political machinations that are happening in the wider world. If we take what Gandalf described him as in the at the Council of Elrond, he has retreated to within borders that he set for himself, and he would not leave them. And he's not particularly interested in what's going on outside in the world. So it's a fair thing to ask, but I don't think we'll see Bombadil. Will we see other wizards? Maybe. Will we get to see Gandalf? I don't think that we'll see much of Gandalf. If we see any, there we go. Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, bum. There we go. Bombadil is a libertarian living in a utopia. Well, I mean, that's one way of looking at it, right? He does have control over his territory, and he is living very happily with his wife, so maybe so. Do we have any other questions about the movie, about the background material, about historical stuff that might have led into this particular thing, or basically anything History of Middle-earth related? At this point, I have exhausted my material, and I hope that it was interesting for everybody. But I'd be happy to continue to palaver as long as you all have questions about it. Let me just make sure that I've hit everything that we talked about. That seems to be just about everything. I hear your boss at Dragon Con was a jerk. How did you make it 4 days? My boss at Dragon Con was pretty great, and I really enjoyed hanging out with my boss at Dragon Con. It was a good time, even if my feet hurt. That was mostly my fault because I should have worn better shoes. Gandalf is unlikely to enter the story. The One Ring is sleeping with the Gollum under the Misty Mountains, and the Ring / Sauron's opposition is Gandalf's main mojo. That is correct. Right, so I doubt that we'll see Gandalf. There's a much better chance that we'll see Sauron sort of at the tag end of the thing. I don't know if we'll see... I don't know why we would see Radagast. I don't know why he would be involved at all. But there's I would say that there's a non-zero chance that Sauron will show up right there at the end. Everyone's just been sitting patiently for an hour and a half waiting for you to critique the Rings of Power. I'm not going to on this stream. So what is your theory on the door and the paths of the dead? Well, it was made by the dead, and the dead keep it, so the way is shut. So pretty clearly, we know that it was Baldur who was the braggart that said that he could enter the paths of the dead. He was supposed to be the king. This is basically going to happen. So now I'm getting really deep into the esoterica. Okay, so the second king of Rohan is this guy named Brego, and he's referred to as Brego the Builder because he was the one that built Medusel, the big golden king, or the big golden mead hall. And at the dedication of this big mead hall, his son, whose name was Baldur, made a boast that he could pass the doors of the dead and walk the paths of the dead. And he went up there and he died. And this is actually something that you can catch if you're really careful and watch really closely in the movie. As they're walking down the path, they pass a dead body that's decked out in really sweet armor. That would be Baldur, who said that he could do it and then clearly got killed. We know that there is a seer whose name is Malbeth that made a prophecy that the only person that could go down this would be the legitimate king who had need pressing him, and he would come from the north, but who actually created the door. That's a hard question to answer. So the people, for those of you that are not super duper steeped in the whole Lord of the Rings thing, there were a lot of different peoples in Middle Earth when the Númenóreans began to come over during the Second Age, right? And many of these people had been friendly with the good people, so they're referred to as men of the Twilight, but many of these people had fallen to Sauron, and they were referred to as men of the Darkness. And the Númenóreans conquered both sets of these people, but befriended the men of the Twilight. These would be people like the Rohirrim, other descendants of people that were part of the original men that moved in during the First Age that didn't go over to Númenor. So there's a difference between Númenóreans, who had been effectively blessed by the gods for assisting to defeat Morgoth at the end of the First Age. They're given Númenor as a benefit. They're given incredibly long age. They're given farsight. They are given all sorts of sort of bonus statistics on their character sheet for doing what they were supposed to. But then they come back over. They start making a lot of alliances. And there was a particular period of time where there was a big war between the kings of Gondor and Sauron, and this happens at the end of the Second Age, and this is what's referred to as the Last Alliance. So this is when Elendil and Gil-galad are going to take the last army of the elves and the last big army of Gondor, and they're going to march on Sauron to basically defeat him once and for all. Both Gil-galad and Elendil are going to die. This is when Isildur picks up the sword and chops off the finger that's told in the prequel or the prelude. But anyway, these particular men that were in the White Mountains. Let me go over here to our map. So there were men right around here, right? So these are the White Mountains. And the men that lived here had sworn allegiance to the kings of Gondor and to the Númenóreans to go fight with them, right? And when it came time to go fight Mordor and to fight Sauron, these men here betrayed Elendil, and they basically said that they were not going to go fight with him. And he banished them to these mountains and to basically to undeath, that they would not rest until they fulfilled their oath to fight against the great evil. And my theory is that after being banished, having no harbor in the world of good men, that they made this kingdom under the mountains. So if you read the descriptions that are in the story, you'll know that there are sort of passageways under these mountains, and there are perhaps even big caverns in these mountains. So my thought is they were cursed and they were banished, and nobody was going to give them any aid. So they made themselves a kingdom and retreated into it. And because they were so, basically, not to use the curse word version of this, but they were damned to their fate, they basically kept to themselves to the point that they all died. And then someone later, knowing that this whole mountain is full of evil, went and carved the door and said, "The way is shut. It is kept by it was made by the dead, and the dead keep it. The way is shut. So don't go in here," knowing that if you went in, it was, going to be your death. So under the mountains made by the people before they all completely went dead and extinct, and then somebody later that knew what was under the mountain put a warning on there that said, "Hey, don't go in there." That's my theory. I could be completely wrong, but I think it jives. Are we wearing the same shirt? If it's a mouse guard shirt, then I think we are. I am wearing the Black Axe mouse guard shirt with Luthabon and the Black Axe people. So that's my theory. Other questions about Lord of the Rings stuff specifically, or First Age stuff or Second Age stuff? This is kind of my world, and I could ramble about this for a long time. Or we could go raid somebody too. That's perfectly fine as well. If anybody, if everybody is all questioned out. I know that I'm about talked out. My voice is getting back to being pretty tired again. Yes. Hit me, Shmonite. Do I recommend... do I recommend watching the Amazon show so far? Watch it if you want to. If you like Lord of the Rings, watch it, give it a shot. I'm glad you were able to leverage our panel content. Oh, absolutely. That I really appreciate all the prep work that went into that. That was excellent amount of prep work, and I appreciate the level of detail. That's what I would have done in that same situation. So, Steve Conley's Kickstarter is ending in 15 minutes. We're probably gonna go raid Steve here in just a second. After Shmonite asks one other question. When they leave the last homely house, so Rivendell, and wander through the barren lands, Legolas talks about the people were there before him. Do we know the story there? Yes. So that particular region is the region of Holland. If we go back to our images, that is kind of this region over here. So they leave the Shire, they come over this way, they end up in Rivendell, and they walk down these mountains right here. So this particular region ends up being pretty important because this is a region. And if you know anything about what's about to happen in the show, Rings of Power, this region right here, which is referred to as a region, is where the rings get made in the first place. So Rivendell right here, a region is right here. This used to be part of a much larger elven kingdom with Lindon and a region right here with Holland that was basically right next to Khazad-dûm, which at that point was called Moria. I'm sorry, Moria, which at that point was called Khazad-dûm. So Moria means Black Pit, and it's sort of a slang name So this is the interest of Khazad Dûm right here. So this is the Dimril Dale where they were trying to pass over to get down into Lorien, etc., etc. You're enjoying the show. You're not super knowledgeable about the area of Middle-earth, so you're willing to overlook its accuracy. Yes, Jim is correct. It is formerly a region, which comes up in the Amazon show. There we go. Sauron is unkind to it. Yes, and to Celebrimbor. Oh, good gracious, is he unkind to Celebrimbor? Especially when they get into a big fight over here in the Grey Havens, where I don't know. Should I spoil that? Okay, so I won't give you spoilers, but I will say that Celebrimbor comes to a rather pointy end. And that is an unfortunate pun that I will allow you to wait to see. You have a question for Jim. Shane said that he got a few laughs during the panel, but you are wondering how many groans. I will have you know that even if my puns are awful, they are always accurate. I might be goofy, but they work out at the end. All right, everybody. Let's go rave Steve Conley real quick. Steve is a great guy, and he is running a Kickstarter that if you have not already backed, you should. He's doing some stuff as an addition for 5e, and he's a great dude with a really great webcomic called The Middle Age, which you should read if you don't already. Let's go show Steve some love. He has rated us many times, and this is going to be great to be able to bring him an audience instead of the other way around. So thank you all very much for hanging out. I appreciate all the questions and the input. My con experience outside was quite good. I had a great time. I got to see a lot of people and meet a lot of great people. I wish I could have spent more time hanging out with the people. I'm just going to have to go hang out with people more in real life, and that seems weird after COVID, but that's what's going to have to happen. Anyway, thank you all so much for hanging out. Yell adventure when we get into Steve's chat. Throw some adventure hats in there if you got them. But until then, see you later. Have a good one. Take it easy.